I'm Heidi Zuckerman. I'm the Nancy and Bob Magoon CEO and Director here at the Aspen Art Museum. And this is one of our artist lectures, which is also, we call them Conversations with Artists, and it's part of the Questrom Artist Lecture Series supported by the Questrom Education Fund. So Sarah Cain studied at the San Francisco Art Institute and the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and earned her MFA at the University of California at Berkeley, which is, I think, where we first met each other. So quite a while ago. Her playful, abstract paintings and installations feature a bold use of color, improvisation, and a variety of perspectives. Her work has been the subject of solo exhibitions at the ICA Los Angeles, the Museum of Contemporary Art the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh, North Carolina, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. And she is here on the occasion of her large-scale work, Mountain Song, which was created specifically for the Elk Camp space on Snowmass Mountain for the 2017-18 ski season. And this marks the 12th year of our partnership with the Aspen Skiing Company. And Sarah is going to talk about her work, maybe for about 20 minutes, and then I'll join her and we will have a brief conversation and then open it up for questions. So we were up there this morning, and if you haven't been up there yet to see the piece, it's amazing. And we'll talk a little bit more about how it looks static in the picture, but it's actually active in person. So it's pretty great.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Heidi. All right. Is this one? You can hear me, right? Do you think we could turn off the lights just so it looks a little better? All right. So this is what's up top at the Elk Lodge. It's called Mountain Song. The way I make my work is largely improvised on site. There's 4 canvases here that is kind of hard to see because the camouflage is in, but I shipped 3 in advance that had some painting. I ended up flipping one of those in reverse and then doing the other painting. Actually, most of them got, all except for the far green one, stayed as is, and the other ones I moved outside and did a lot of painting up at the Elk Lodge. It was when it was closed, so it was really peaceful, totally different experience from going up there today. Although I had seen photos, so I knew how active it was going to be, and I really wanted to make a piece that could contend with all that action up there. And I sort of keep coming back to this black dot and the rainbow as my favorite parts in the piece that I've been thinking about. But the way I work is sort of attack and resolve, and then my brain catches up sometimes 2 years later. And I just wanted to show you, this is so old, about 20 years ago, but it's really the roots of how I started. I was going into abandoned buildings and making these really minimal works on site. And they are, I think it really does sort of inform what I'm still doing. Like, there's something that I can't articulate yet about that stripe and the black dot and how I've been moving through this circle and various other works, and I felt like it finally resolved for the first time up at the, or not for the first time. It works in the other ones, but it does something new in a way that I'm interested in, where it almost became sculptural up at the Elk Lodge. This also had that effect. This was at Honor Fraser. This last painting is called Glory. It's 60 by 48 inches. It's beads, a hula hoop. This was a work on site, 2015. And you can see how there's canvases in this one too. But the canvases are sort of taking over and becoming more of the wall. And the earlier ones, they sort of function more as like hanging a painting inside of it. So there's been a lot of shifts happening that I'm still wrapping my brain about. That has rose petals. So there's a lot of collage, spontaneity, and just experimentation with what painting can be. This is currently at the ICA LA. It's up until March 11th. It's called And Now I'm Going to Tell You Everything, which is the first line that a poem by the poet Bernadette Mayer wrote for me. You'll notice that bench here. So there's canvases, backpacks, braided, shredded canvas. I made this in 9 days in a heat wave. These backpacks were at the supply store that I was buying the spray paint at, and I kept walking by and from trying to like have better judgment and not buy these backpacks. And then I realized I think they thought I was going to steal them, so I was like, I'm just going to buy them. And they were the final touches, and I really love them. there's a lot of braiding going on. It's a sort of an act of patience if I can exist as a woman with long hair. And also before I paint, I always braid my hair. But whenever I'm frustrated, I cut it all off. So there's this thing between my body echoing in the work. To me, but I wanted to call out this bench. So this is the poet Bernadette Mayer with the braids, who we lived in the same village for a long time in upstate New York. And we used to hang out after I would paint, she'd write, and we'd go down to the river, and local kids threw her bench in the river, and she was really upset about it. And she's like a legend. She's a total genius, but she's completely broke. So I wanted to get her a new bench, and I liked the idea that someone could sit inside of the piece titled after her poem at the same time she's sitting on the bench. And she loves the bench. So it all worked out. But it also had me thinking about portraiture. Even though I'm an abstract painter and I've always worked in abstraction, they're very much based in real life. This is a painting called Emily. It's a specific painter, my friend Emily Wilson. This painting really is who she is. There's pinwheels and sunglasses. This one I was thinking of Agnes Martin, which it doesn't look like an Agnes Martin painting at all, but it's sort of my interpretation of Agnes. And I had just her former house and studio in Galisteo was on the market, so I pretended I was going to buy it, and I went and saw it and toured it and was like, this really amazing experience. I collected some rocks. I saw her studio size was the same size as mine. It made me feel good. And this is called Waves. This is a work on site that's still in Los Angeles. It's the exterior of Los Angeles Nomadic Division's headquarters, which is the craziest corner in LA, in West Hollywood. That corner is the epicenter of trans prostitution. So this painting is called Hey Babe, Take a Walk on the Wild Side. I made it in 3 days. And so many of the ladies came up and told me, like, you got the corner, you know, if you got the energy. So I was very proud of this one. Also, it was around the corner from all these pot stores, so a lot of people thought it was a new pot store, which was pretty funny. So this is a huge work on site. I also did in 9 days at the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh in 2005. This is just sort of show you like what happens when I'm making the work. There was no planning in this one. This is the finished work. It was called The Imaginary Architecture of Love. And those are mattresses placed in it that people could lay on and look at the painting. I also am like pretty low maintenance when it comes to materials. I'm not cheap, but I don't like to spend a lot on the art. So all the mattresses went to a women's shelter, and it's pretty basic materials. And at this point, the circles were happening, but I was really consumed with these X's, which I think had to do mentally with taking up space and just sort of standing there and in a spot that maybe wasn't comfortable, or like making my voice louder. This is one of the walls. And then these outside windows. So the piece was like 6,000 square feet from the windows to the lobby inside. And this is one of the times that I've painted on the windows, but I've been doing this a lot for over a decade. This was 2011 with Lauren, worked on this with me with Land and Marfa. So this was a Masonic lodge. That negative space is the negative space of the Masonic symbol. And then I think I was there 2 weeks, I made 6 pieces. That painting is called The Supreme Being, which I interviewed Masons. I talked to a lot of people, and like the core belief was that you have to believe in the Supreme Being, but that can fluctuate. So I was trying to make a painting which was the Supreme Being. So if you invest your whole life in painting as your God or whatever. And then across from this one was called The Face of Satan, which was made in a crazy hailstorm, thunder and lightning. And I heard this local guy call 911 and say the face of Satan is in the sky, and get everyone in the basement of the church. And so there was a lot of like just dealing with whatever was happening right around me. Also, I love looking back at this piece because I was so horribly uncomfortable by it. It was just so intense. And now I love it, but it's funny how things come out and it takes me like a while not to be embarrassed or self-conscious. And I like to sort of pause and try to take that in and remember that you're probably onto something if that's happening. But back to the windows, I'm finally doing a dream window piece at a new terminal SFO. I'm making a 10-foot by 148-foot stained glass window with this historic studio in Los Angeles. And we're in production now. I just sourced like over 200 types of glass, and then also we're making our own glass, and we're filling it in this whole paint by number, and that's not even all of it. It's so overwhelming and wild, and exciting just to see. I always make all my work myself, and I never have assistants, so it's a huge learning curve to communicate and talk to people, and I think it's going to expand it in a great way. And I think a lot of the stained glass relates a lot to these works on paper I do. So I usually do these big works on site, and then I come back in the studio and I ground myself with works on paper, which come a lot out of illuminated manuscripts, shaker's drawings. This is a book I've been working on. It has over 25 gouache drawings. It's a book someone made themselves of all the music they were practicing and shows they went to in the 1800s, which I didn't know. I probably wouldn't have painted in it. I would have thought it was too precious. But it's a pretty cool object too. This was a self-portrait from like 2009. And then this started killing me, and I had to have all this acupuncture because it's so much brushwork. So I transitioned mostly out of those into doing these smaller talismans, which are painted on dollar bills. And there's a grid of 15 of those, or 16 of those, I can't remember, up at the Elk Lodge in the staircase. So these are things I do as gifts for friends, or just sort of more accessible art. They're small, and I really believe in the magic of them. I think if you talk to them or hang them by where you sit, they'll bring you money. This is a spread of me and all my dollar bills. Which this image always makes me think of this floor work I did at Gallery Lalong, September 2016, I think it was. And it's just under 3,000 square feet, and it's going to get reinstalled in Columbus, Ohio soon, which I'm excited about. And I made it in my small studio, which was really wild. This was one of my favorite paintings from the show. It's called Enter the Center. It has all this chain. This was another one of my favorites. It was called Black Magic. It must have been the yellow and the black, even before it had the strings, my cats were going crazy. They were seeing things in this painting that I could not see. They were just like jumping and diving into it. And then this was a show, just part of it. I make so much work. Every time I do a lecture, I just put a new group together, because I think I probably have 1,000 paintings at this point. This was Bow Down at Honor Fraser in LA in 2015, and these furniture works were a pivotal shift for me. I was trying to do something that had one piece of furniture and one canvas, which is another thing I've been coming back to, with one canvas and one something else. This dresser, I was listening to Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly before it was out. It was a portrait of that. It's just called Dresser, but if you open the drawers, they're all painted too. These are earlier works. This is like 2008, where it was one canvas shoved against architecture. It's called For Cynthia. It was in spring in New York when they were starting to bloom. This is called Living Together. This was called Ray-Bans with slits. It was when Kanye was wearing those Ray-Bans. This is from 2011. Also, I've been doing a lot of these chain paintings, which I've sort of been trying to put the groups together to see how it changes over the years. But this is a good example of how a lot of junk gets sewn into my work. And I think it elevates it past junk. This one has paint rollers all in it, which is really hilarious. It's called Hole Punch. This was a show I curated at MCA San Diego of my work and work from their collection. I did, though, buy some and borrow some work because I didn't love the collection. There's a Beatrice wood I bought that you can't see, and a sandback that you can't see from their collection. Regina Bogat, so that's me. Then Regina Bogat, who's the widow of Alfred Jensen, which is the print. It's like called Mystic Vulva or something really trippy. She's still alive. She's amazing. She made that work on paper with string hanging out in 1973 across the hall from Eva Hesse. Then that plaid thing is me. I borrowed Andrea Zittel, me. I took John Davola from their collection and me. I wanted to have an Agnes in there, but they opened up the, who is it, Ireland? Who's the windows cut out? At the, you know that piece where they just cut the squares out of the windows? I think it's a David Ireland piece. Is it? Yeah. So they did that right next to it, which was phenomenal, but then all my pieces of high value had to be pulled because of the humidity. But it was a cool experience. These were mine from that show. Oh, and this is an early chain piece. So I did all these works on site in a parking structure in London during a rainy season, which was pretty wild. And I didn't like this piece at all, but now I really like it. And this is a painting in my studio now called Emotions, which is going to a show in London, which is also weird that it's like returning to London with these chains. It's a recent gallery show I just did in San Francisco. It was during the fires there, and I guess now it's called the Robin Williams Tunnel, but I was thinking about the tunnel that has the rainbow painted over it when you are driving up the 101. That's my studio protege. He is Roxy and my bras. I was trying to recycle my junk. This is called SF Rays. I was trying to make a painting that was like capturing what San Francisco was in its good old days, which it totally is not anymore. It has prisms all over it. These are in the hallway. Yeah, I'm not going to go too. They all have funny stories, but this was the studio. I love seeing how the studio changes with the different shows. And then this is what's in my studio now. These are going to a show, Tim Taylor in April in London. This is called Crying Cat Eyes, and the area that looks sort of like stained glass or the mosaic, the shapes are made by whiskers laid down, which is really funny and weird, and you probably would never know. This is called Black Widow. It also has prisms hanging from the top, or one prism. I do that a lot in the paintings, and I'm really excited. The SFO painting, or the SFO stained glass, and also the stained glass I'm making for London has beveled glass put in it, which is going to put prisms throughout the space. Oh, and then this, I can't believe Liz just reminded me, is in 2 weeks. I have to go to the Armory and make this. It's 45 feet by 14 feet. It's going to be at the entryway of Pier 94. And I think it like really relates to the piece here. It makes sense that it's the next one. Yeah, and I think that's the last image. How did I do with time? Almost 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's perfect. So, yeah, the lights are good. I think there's often sort of a mystique around artists, and some of that is about, why artists do what they do and how they do what they do, and I'm struck. I mean, we got to spend a lot of the day together today, which was really great.
Yeah.
Because then the conversation can just evolve and ebb and flow, and one of the things that I was thinking about in looking at your work today and in the slides is how immersive the environments are that you create. And I was struck by our conversation talking about your studio space and the 8 cats that you live with, and how there can be only 8, and how you know that, and then the kind of overgrown garden, and I guess I wanted to ask you about that and sort of the psychic space in which you live and work. Yeah. And how you see that kind of seamless or fragmented, and how that feels for you.
Yeah, it's really connected. Do I have to lean forward? Can you? No. Okay. There's really no division between my work and my life. And also, like the works on site, I used to create these huge plastic bubbles around me when I was making them so people wouldn't get in my psychic space. And I'm getting a lot better at tuning it out. But I think to make my work, I have to live in this world where boundaries fade away, but then also to protect yourself, you have to have the boundaries. So it's been a funny learning experience, but I do have the utopian situation right now, which I've wanted my whole life, which I'm trying to appreciate every moment. Yeah, and I also, about the immersiveness, when I was coming up, I hated going to a museum. I felt like, oh, here's a great piece of art, you put it in here and it dies. And I really wanted to make work that was active, that made the viewer feel and see it in the present tense. And as I've been doing more and more of them, I think the paintings also have that energy in them, which is really important to me.
So you used the word junk a couple of times, and then the first time you used it, you kind of like corrected yourself, and you said, well, it's not really junk, you know.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be this sort of like effects of your daily life.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, you know, how you choose what actually leaves what it used to be and enters into the space of art.
Sometimes it's like a feeling around the object, and sometimes it's like, I'm so annoyed by this, I need to transcend it, which is, the feathers came a lot out of that. But also, like, I'm really good friends with George Herms, and it makes so much sense to me. Like, we have this California funk scavenger thing that just makes sense. And I think also it comes out of poverty, too, to be honest. Like, I'm finally to the point where I can buy the materials I want, but the working in abandoned buildings was because I couldn't afford studio rent. But there's something to the immediacy of the necessity that I think keeps a purity or something in the work that I'm interested in.
So you talked about the X's as kind of claiming space but being heard. And I guess I'd like to ask you, you know, what does your work say? What do you want people to hear from it?
I mean, that's a hard one, but I really think the artist shouldn't be talking, that the work should be talking. And I'm totally suspicious of when you have to read about the art to get it. But more, it was about personally taking space and navigating the art world and claiming my own power. And I never used to say yes to lectures, and then I realized, like, just keep doing it until you can do it, you know? So it was more psychologically about me being like, this is my life, I'm committing everything to it, and I'm taking up 6,000 square feet, and you're gonna deal with it. And you might enjoy it. But I think really, like, integrity and truthfulness are the things in my work, and like a lively something, like a life force, are like the most important elements.
What do you think about personal responsibility in the work, both for the artist and for the viewer of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think abstraction gets you off the hook a bit with that. However, though, like, I do think about things that I don't have the right to claim, even like with that piece that is a portrait of Kendrick Lamar's album. I'm like, I can't. It's not my history. So I can be inspired, and I listen to music all the time. I can't really work without it. In the studio, it keeps me company. So, like, I have this, you know, I have conversations in my head when I'm working about what's okay to lift and what's not. And then from the viewer, I just think viewers should actually be present and spend time looking at art and see art in person, not just online.
Do you think that's harder for people than it should be?
Yeah, attention spans are really short. Yeah. But also part of the, like, trying to take up space and talk and be honest, I feel a responsibility to do that for other artists under me, and especially for women artists, I feel like they need to see people that are just being truthful, and I don't know, I think it's important. Like, part of going to Agnes's was, okay, you have a tree of people before you, or when I met Mary Heilman, I was like, all right, freedom. Like, I got a green card for parts of me that I question or, like, I get shit for, which, yeah.
So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different levels of how people live off their work or have careers, and I mean, culturally things are shifting, but to be an outspoken woman, to be a woman who looks younger, like, there's all these things that have affected my career in different ways, and you can feel bad about it, or even just taking up space. Like, I used to have such a hard time if I was writing a grant speaking for my work, so I'd have to say, write it as if you were writing for your best friend who you believe in. And I'd use that trick a lot when I'm like, if I do studio visits with students, is like, just, you believe in it, so don't feel bad. And that's a lot of the personality when I met Mary, we went to, Amy Silman invited us all to dinner. So it was me, Rebecca Morris, Amy Silman, and Mary Heilman. And I was like, yes, thank God. Like,
That's a pretty rad group. I know all of them. Yeah, that's pretty great. So I'll share a story. So Kathy Hallbright, who was the longtime director of the Walker Art Center and is currently the associate director at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, a board member of mine here and a friend, at one point said to me, well, you should get a mentor. And I was like, how do you do that, right? Like, I'd never had one, and who would it be? And anyway, I thought about it for a couple of years, and then I realized that I wanted it to be Kathy. So I, and I knew her, but, not well, and so I went to her office at MoMA, and it was right after, so we actually tried to do the museum originally on another site, and had a very, public election, and it was just a horrific thing. I mean, it was totally demoralizing. And I went to see Kathy about being my mentor. I think this just went out. Yeah, there it goes. Right after that, and I asked her if she would be my mentor, and she said no. And that she, it's funny, I've been to MoMA to ask for things 3 times, and 3 times I've been turned down, so I'm sure my next time it's going to be, a yes. But I was just teasing Glenn Lowry, who's the director, who's been here and sat actually here and had this conversation with me too. But she said, no, I can't be your mentor. I don't have enough time. But, I just want you to know that you're not responsible for building the new museum in Aspen. And you don't have to do that. And she said, women often feel like really responsible.
Yeah.
And she said, it's not on you. Like, you made a huge effort. You tried really hard. And if you're done and you want to leave Aspen and walk away from the project, I give you permission. And I just started to cry, and I'm not a crier.
Yeah.
Everyone here knows there's no crying at work. No one can make anyone cry. No one's allowed to cry at work. If you have to cry, you have to go outside. So really caught me off guard. And but this idea of her giving me that permission, because then I could come back here and say you know what? Actually, I want to build a museum in Aspen. So I'm doing it because I want to, not because I felt obligated. Right? And so I'm hearing from you that kind of sense from Mary too, where, it takes someone who you really admire, of, a previous generation, right? To say guess what? Own the pride that you have in the work that you make.
Yeah.
So, and stand up for it.
Yeah, I'm now remembering that the specific detail with her is we both had gone to Berkeley, and we both were they had a huge problem, my attitude, but it was that I was having career success, and it was our attitude. And it's it's that things aren't always bad, that people have problems with, and permission is amazing. And then giving that back, I work with she's 16 now, and I've been mentoring her since she was 12, and it's so adorable and cool. She's so articulate, and I don't know, just.
How did she find you, or you find her?
Her mother found me. Her mother found me at an event, and I was like, well, you can bring her over to my studio. And I was like, all right, I need to do this. She reminded me a lot of me as a kid, and it's been great. And then my Stanya Khan has a son who is trying to get into the art high school that Roxy goes to. So we did a portfolio day, and Roxy's 4 years older than him, and they did portfolio days and watched, she helped him with his portfolio. I was like, oh my God, it just never ends. It's the cycle.
So I like that idea of giving back. And in your work, it seems almost like a given, so it's not being necessarily called out. And you're often mentioning it almost as an aside, oh yeah, when the beds were done, I gave them to a women's shelter.
Yeah.
And it's wait, pause, what? That's, So how do you come to that?
I mean, that's part of the responsibility, and I also think it's part of the works on site. I, for years, had a problem with dealing with the commercial art world, and I don't really anymore, but I still do the works on site, and it just seems like a way to balance out and make it all positive or something.
So the colors in your work are super bright, and that, I think, often connotes a positivity.
Yeah.
Is that important for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think that a lot of my work comes out of anger or maybe like figuring out how not to be depressed about things. So it might just be an innate way that I'm getting myself through things. And sometimes I'm like, you have to make a white work on site, and I'll do it, and it's like, they're fine, but I am a colorist, so I don't know, it's just like, I've never understood color classes where you have to learn how to mix a color, because it's just something I can do. And also there's also like when I moved to LA, something shifted where it went really maximum, and I almost wanted to like go grody like with the work, like just push it. And that's LA. Like it's, there's so many elements of LA that are like, oh my God, how can that still be standing?
So you just used the word grody.
Grody to the max
Grody
is what
to
I was
the
going to
max,
say, yeah.
So the other day, a friend of mine used the word bitchin', and I was like, wait, did you actually say bitchin'? Like just in a sentence that was ongoing. And now all these words have different meanings, right?
Yeah.
Like apparently now thick is a compliment,
Oh, yeah.
so, which I don't really get. But
It's about butts.
yes, that's what I heard. That's what I heard. So language is clearly important in your work,
Yeah.
the titles and connections to poetry, songs. How do
Yeah.
you choose them?
They're what's around me. Like for a while, most of my friends were all writers and poets. Bernadette and Bill Berkson were friends back in the day. Bernadette made 0 to 9 with Vito Acconci, so she's steeped in all of that. But Bill was my teacher, really good friend. I miss him. So I did this thing with Now I'm Going to Tell You Everything was Bernadette's title, and then the San Francisco show right after I called Racing with the Moon, which is the way Bill signed the last book he gave to me. So there's all these like hidden little poetries and stories. I like that on my resume. They sit next to each other. They can hang out in space somehow. And I write too, and I read, and obviously I read, but it's important to me. It's like my escape.
All right, I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. Yes?
When in the process do you come up with the title?
So I'm just going to repeat the questions for the TV audience. The question was, when in the process do you come up with the titles for your work?
It's funny, sometimes it's right away. I struggled so hard to find the title for my London show, and I think it was because I was having other mental problems with it. And then finally, the last painting I made was called Wildflower, and I was like, oh, of course, that's the title. But for like 4 months, they were pressuring me, and I just couldn't figure it out. And it was so silly because I'd had to deal with like a lot of the entertainment world in LA for a few months and gone to award shows, and every title I picked was a movie title. When I Googled it, it's like, what are you doing? You're turning to shit. But I'm happy with Wildflower, and and sometimes they're my own writing too. Yeah.
Would you tell us a little bit more about your London parking lot project?
Oh yeah.
So the question was to be told a little bit more about the London parking lot project.
It's this series called Bold Tendencies that they do in Peckham in this parking lot. I think they're on like 7 or 8 of it. At my time, I think there was 6 of us invited from all over. Hannah Berry was one of the people behind it. Anita Zabaludowicz's curator, Lizzie, invited me. So that's how I got there, and it was rough. I mean, there was no bathroom, there was no water. It was I took it out because I feel like I should stop talking about it, but I did this piece called Modern where me and my assistant, we had to pee in buckets, and then I put them in jars and then put paint so that then they had to shake the jars every day so you could see these. It was my total fuck you. But it was a cool project, and I'm really happy I did it. But I was like, a little luxury, because they put compostable porta potties up there because there's a bar after. I was like, we could have done that. But it was a cool project, and then it had all these benches that I found local fabric that came from, it's printed in Denmark, but it's Nigerian, and there's all these Nigerian churches, so we'd hear all the music when we were making the work, and it was cool.
Did cars ever park there while the art was there?
No. It turns into like this really hip restaurant and kind of like a rave. Like the opening was one of the most bizarre openings I've ever had. Like I had to leave. I was terrified. But they do cool art. It's called Bold Tendencies, and it's a thing over there. Yeah.
Yep.
which
Mhm.
looks amazing.
Thanks.
And it also looks like very planned out though and complete. So I was
Yeah.
curious because you said a lot of your work's very spontaneous and site specific. So I was curious if you could speak a little bit about if and how you think this is going to change once you start working on it on site.
So the question was about the piece that Sarah's about to do for the armory and how the image that was presented here seems totally resolved, and it's a question about whether that will be its final form or how it might evolve.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm in the cusp of a new learning curve. There's 7 canvases, 6 of them are already painted, and I think it's not going to change too much. It's called 2-day painting. They're actually giving me 3 days, but I can't really advertise that. But 3 days is not a lot of time. So I think it's going to stay, I hope it's going to stay pretty much like that because we had to buy the paint in advance. But after I shipped the canvas here for the Elk Lodge, I had never done that before. I'd never painted on them in my studio and shipped them, and it was kind of wild. Like, it just brought this element of my studio into the space, and it made me, like, be able to just have more flexibility with the time. But if you've ever been to an art fair, like, it's kind of the worst environment for making art, especially during install. And it's gonna be cold. So I think that this is gonna look like that. I hope, but who knows?
I love it.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
I love how the location of your works, parking garages and
Yeah.
streets of LA and the ski lodge, top of Snowmass. Is there a space or a place that you would like to do a piece that you haven't yet done?
Yeah.
So the question was based on the variety of places in which Sarah's already installed works. Is there something that a space that she desires that she hasn't been able to do yet?
Yeah, I really want to do the football stadium gallery in Masmoka, and I really want to take over a whole abandoned house, which I've written grants for and have not yet won. But I'd like to do it near an institution that I could gift, and then it could become a permanent destination. So if you know anybody.
Did another question? Yeah.
I had a question about when you did the Raleigh
Mhm.
installation, you said it was sort of not, you didn't really plan anything. So where do you start, like, how do you even, like, what supplies do you have, how do you know how long it's gonna take you?
Oops, I got to put my password.
So it was a question about, and I think that's part of what Sarah was getting at in terms of the evolution of her learning process. So some of the early works didn't have a plan, and then now the ornery piece is really laid out. So before you had a plan, how did you start?
They're mostly just based on right before what colors look good, but also sometimes I get goofy, and like that one was called The Imaginary Architecture of Love, so all the colors were like heartbreak, despair, lust, really silly color titles from Home Depot. There's something I was going to say about this too that I just, oh, never mind, I'm not going to say that out loud. Edit.
Other questions? Mike? Yeah.
Seems like you have a bit of you sort of go through an emotional cycle with your work. Do you ever not get through the cycle and decide to throw it out or start over, or is it just part of your natural creation process?
The question was about the emotional cycle for the artist in each work, and does it always complete, or does it sometimes stop, and then what happens?
It's rare that I abandon a painting, but sometimes I do. Usually that's when I have to move studios or there's some life shift that gets in the way. But I also work on in the studio there's got to be 30 paintings going on, and I'm doing off-site 5 projects. So I work on so much that I jump in and out of the pieces based on the emotion I stopped working on it in and where I'm in, and it's liberating because I stay balanced that way. Yeah.
Yes.
So you have a lot of different languages of mark making in your work. How do you navigate that and employ those?
The question observed the variety of diversity of mark-making language in the work, and the question is, how do you navigate between those?
I love, I'm a painting geek, and I love, looking at graffiti that gets painted out, or, going to see old manuscripts. So I sort of just absorb a database of different ways to make marks. It's amazing if I see a painting and I don't know how it's done, and I'm really experimental with the way I apply paint. So it's just fun to me. It's a good challenge.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could speak more about the stained glass piece.
Mhm.
It seems like such a departure. The medium is such a departure, and the limitations of that medium and the exciting challenges or what you've discovered.
The question was to talk more about the project for the San Francisco airport and the difference of working in those materials and that circumstance and the opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, it's been really wild. I'm learning a lot. I didn't really know anything about glass before. And it's part stained glass and part fused glass, which we're actually making the glass. So there's parts in it that look like that watercolor up there of the rainbow. Whole panes are going to look like that, and they look like watercolor, which is really wild. So as we've been going along, I've been realizing how to use the material to fit my ways of painting, but also I love that I don't have control over it, and working with these masters. Louisa is the glass cutter, and she's 4th generation, and the studio did all Frank Lloyd Wright's first buildings. They've been around since the 1800s. It's crazy. I know nothing compared to them, and it's really humbling because I like to do everything myself, but I think I need to work with someone who knows so much more for me to just be like, all right. Although they had a master from Italy come in, and I was like, he's an artist too. I need technicians, not another artist. So I've been learning. He's very sweet and very talented, but I'm learning what I can deal with and what I can't, and it's going to be wild to see.
When is it going to be installed?
April 2019. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question about the painted dollars, which are up at Elk Camp also, and you've referred to them a couple times as talisman, and also talked about their kind of inherent magic qualities.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd love a story about how you know they work.
Well, they work, but the first dollar bill I found folded up outside of my studio in a little triangle, and when I unfolded it, I realized, it's a hot press paper, just like the music sheets I was doing, but I found it right when the recession started. So the first group I made, it was called Eye of the Storm, and they hung like a mobile, and they all get the pyramid or the eye left out, so you know it's a dollar, but I've given them to tons of friends. They work for me. They pull through for me. But the funniest is my friend Coulter Jacobson. He said he had to take his down because it was working too well. I was like, there's no such thing. Just donate.
I actually feel like that's where we should end.
Okay.
I really do. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.